Hi, everybody. Great juxtaposition for what we're talking about today. There's Mark Lewis, our former chair of the AQB, talking about what it's like to be out in those rural properties. And then now we're going to dive right into the opposite topic, which is all about using AI and how the appraiser can go about doing that. So, welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this webinar. We have got with us today the chair and the vice chair of the Appraisal Standards Board so that they can summarize a concept paper that the Appraisal Standards Board has out there right now on artificial intelligence and USPAP and where they overlap and is there anything else needed. So I'm going to quickly ask Tim and to introduce yourself and Nick as well. Nick, you go first.
Thanks, Lisa, and welcome everybody. I am a certified general real estate appraiser in Orlando, Florida, and I'm also an AQB certified USPAP instructor. I work in the world of commercial and appraisal review and also a little bit of residential.
Thanks, Nick. Tim.
Thanks, Lisa. Hello, everyone. Thanks for your time attending this webinar today. We're excited to have this out there and hear your thoughts. I'm a certified general appraiser here in Colorado, and previously I worked in federal government appraisal, but have transitioned into the private sector doing appraisal review and consulting work. So thank you for your attendance.
Great. And I'm Lisa Damaris, the Vice President of Appraisal Issues. So I serve as the technical support to this board and to the AQB as well. I'm technically a certified residential appraiser, but I don't go out and do appraisals anymore. So let's talk about webinar logistics today. We do want you to feel free to ask questions, type them into the Q&A in there, and I will either be answering those, with written comments if they're quick to answer, or we're going to be presenting those and reading those out loud to Nick and Tim near the end. So if anything pops into your mind while you listen to them, just go to the bottom of the screen, click on the Q&A and type it in there. And then if you just have general thoughts or comments, you can put those in the chat box as well. But it's easier for us if you put your questions you would like the board members to answer in that Q&A box. But I can handle it if it's okay if it ends up in the chat box. So for agenda today, we are going to discuss, as I mentioned, the concept paper titled Generative Artificial Intelligence and Appraisal Standards, a call for stakeholders' input. So Nick and Tim are obviously going to be leading us through this paper. One thing I wanted to make note of before we get into this too much with them is that we really need your comments because everything that the board does comes from understanding how the world views things, what issues you're having, what questions you have. So when you go to the concept paper, you're going to see that there are two ways you can submit your comments. You can just email your comments. There's a link, or actually in the paper, there is a link where it opens up and it allows you to fill your comments in right there. So you got a separate email or by following the link. So I just wanted to bring that up to you. All right, Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you real quick.
Great, thanks, Lisa. And just to reiterate, if you have not provided your thoughts yet, we hope you will soon. The Appraisal Standards Board issued this concept paper on April 2nd. The feedback has been coming in steadily, and we're asking for everybody to get their comments submitted by May 31st. So you still have time. And as our viewers might know, the board regularly solicits and receives comments and suggestions for improving USPAP. Proposed changes are intended to enhance USPAP understanding and enforceability and to achieve the goal of promoting and maintaining public trust in appraisal practice.
Thanks for that note, Tim. All right, well, let's get into the details here. Nick and Tim, I'm going to have you guys go over the concepts, and then we're going to take some questions at the end. We do hope that, Nick and Tim will be able to answer most of your questions, not just through their presentation, but also what you asked them here today. And then, as always, you can always just email me directly, lisad@appraisalfoundation.org, if you have a longer question or if you have something more you want to address or you think of tomorrow. Or today even. So let's jump in. Let's get this started, Nick.
Yeah. All right, yeah, let's begin with some background on why we're here today. The Appraisal Standards Board issued this concept paper to explore how generative AI tools might impact appraisal practice and to ask you, our stakeholders, to weigh in. Generative AI is a category of artificial intelligence that produces new content, not limited to text, based on patterns it learns from data. In the context of appraisal practice, it could be used to create property descriptions, summarize data, or even create charts and graphs, just like existing spreadsheet programs. But it's more than just a tool. It presents both opportunities and risks. This paper doesn't propose a specific change to USPAP or guidance. It's a conversation starter, something we hope promotes your feedback to better inform the board of the best way that we can ensure public trust in appraisal practice. The concept paper highlights some key elements in USPAP related to generative AI. Let's start with discussing some of those, specifically the ethics rule, which has two big components, conduct and confidentiality related to this topic. Under the conduct section, the key point is that appraisers must not mislead. That means if you're using AI generated content in a report and you don't verify it, you could unintentionally violate the rule. For example, if an AI tool fabricates or hallucinates or even distorts information and you include that without scrutiny, you may have crossed the line. Then there's confidentiality. A lot of AI tools operate on a cloud-based platform, and some retain data to train the models. If you input sensitive data into the AI system, you may unknowingly violate the confidentiality obligations, especially if you don't understand where the data goes or how it's stored. In both cases, the responsibility falls on the appraiser, not the tool.
Perfect summary of that, Nick. And I also think that there is a tie to the record keeping rule. Tim, would you like to explain how the record keeping rule relates to AI?
Sure. If you use generative AI during an assignment, say it helped you draft a section of your report, you need to document that in your work file. Not just that you used it, but how you used it and what it produced. And that can be a real challenge because some tools don't store the outputs or allow you to retrieve previous results. And USPAP requires that you keep true copies of everything that supports your assignment results. So if the tool can't reproduce its output, or if you didn't save it, you're out of compliance. Again, you're responsible for your work file, not the tool. And moving into the competency rule, let's talk about that for just a minute. This one's pretty straightforward. If you're going to use a generative AI tool, you need to understand how it works and what its limitations are. It doesn't mean you have to be a programmer, but you do need to be able to assess whether what it gives you is reliable, relevant, and appropriate for your assignment. If you can't do that, you're not competent to use the tool. Also, relying on AI can't replace your professional judgment. USPAP says that no matter the tool, the appraiser is responsible for credible assignment results. That applies here just as much as it does to any other method. Another consideration when using AI is a scope of work rule. Nick can tell us more about that.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Yes, so the scope of work rule says that you, as the appraiser, decide what needs to be done to develop credible results. That includes deciding whether a tool like generative AI is appropriate to use and whether the risk it brings can be managed. For example, if you use AI that occasionally hallucinates, meaning that it generates information that sounds right, but it is false, you have to account for that in your process. You also have to disclose your scope of work in your report, including any AI-based methods you relied on. You are responsible for your decision and level of work performed. Bottom line. Let's wrap up now with the standards themselves. Standard 1 and 2, which cover development and reporting for real property appraisals. Standard 1 tells us that an appraiser must use recognized methods and must not be careless in developing an appraisal. That includes situations where an AI tool might give you incomplete or even a biased result. You can't accept that. Standard 2 focuses on how you communicate your results. The appraiser, not the AI, must clearly and accurately describe the appraisal. If you include something the AI generated that is misleading or unclear, you're responsible for that, even if you didn't write it yourself. The overarching message tools can assist, but they don't replace appraiser's judgment or an appraiser's obligation.
Thanks, Nick. Let's now talk a little bit about what guidance exists today. The board has previously issued Advisory Opinion 37, which deals with computer-assisted valuation tools. It provides a foundation for understanding how to use automated tech responsibly. But here's the thing, AO37 predates generative AI. It doesn't address tools that can write narratives, summarize content, or rephrase inputs. That's why this concept paper asks whether it's time to revise AO37, replace AO37, or supplement it with new AI-specific guidance. the board isn't assuming the answer. We genuinely want to know what you all think.
Oh, thank you, Tim, and thank you, Nick, for both taking us through the concept paper and for running through all of the USPAP requirements related to using AI. So here's the part of the webinar. I know it's a little quicker than most of them are because it's pretty direct questions coming from the Appraisal Standards Board, looking to understand if you need better guidance, basically. So since the concept paper, there are several questions that are in there, and we're asking for you to help us by answering those questions. Some of the questions in there are, for example, they ask, hey, appraisers, like, how are you using AI? So it's important for the Appraisal Standards Board to understand how you use the tool, as that helps them understand how to write guidance as needed. And for regulators, like, what oversight challenges are you seeing? Or just keep your eye out for those, and as they develop, reach out to us at any time, even outside of this particular concept paper. And for users of appraisal services, does AI affect how you view appraisal reliability? Is there anything in there that you need to be able to better understand? So the ASB, as Nick and Tim mentioned, they right now, they're not proposing any rule changes to USPAP. The board is not proposing that. What they're doing is they're very much listening. They're trying to understand what your world is like, how you use this, and what kind of help you need to make your job easier. So your answers, your input, and just your thoughts, they really help the board decide, what kind of guidance to issue. And if that feels intimidating because you feel like, I'm not really sure about AI yet, I really don't have enough information in my mind to even ask a really, educated question on the topic, doesn't matter. It's just like whatever is impacting you about this topic that you have a question on, or that you're seeing or you're understanding, because all of it matters to the ASB trying to understand what you're living through out there when it relates to AI. So what we're gonna do now, again, I'm encouraging you, if you're not able or you have a lot more to say, encouraging you to go into that concept paper, provide your comments to the board by the end of May. But for now, this is also your opportunity, if you would like, to insert your questions in the Q&A, and I will ask those to Nick and Tim. So if you give me just a minute here, I'm going to go over to those and see. Hold on, I'm not that fast. Okay. So I'm looking for any Q&A questions people have on the topic, or if you can put them in the Q&A, or you can put them in the chat. Let me take a quick look from the chat and see if people have issued any questions in here. Let's see, we've got a couple questions related to licensing. Please do email me for that, because that would be an AQB question. I can answer that off of line here. Someone is asking for us to provide the links. Looks like we can do that. Here we go. Hallucination. ChatGPT can produce information that is inaccurate or fabricated or doesn't align with reality. Okay, that was just a statement. My apologies.
Lisa, I could provide a real quick example of one that I've experienced firsthand, if that would help on the hallucinations.
That's great. Thank you, Tim.
So in doing some research on some litigation, I asked AI about court cases related to a specific right-of-way situation related to federal acquisition of rights-of-way. And it gave me multiple citations of court cases at the federal level that I had done a lot of research. And so it didn't seem like, I thought, how did I miss all these? Because there was like 5 of them that came in. And so then I went backwards and started plugging in the citations that it gave me to the appropriate LexisNexis search engine. Nothing existed. So it made up like 5 court cases with citations that did not actually exist. And if I wouldn't have checked those, if I would have just relied on the information provided by the AI tool, I would have been in a lot of trouble. So that's just one quick example of how you have to be very diligent about sort of backstopping everything that it provides you to make sure that you are competent to use it, and that the tool is providing competent and credible results.
Thank you, Tim. And with that, you have prompted lots of questions. They're pouring in right now, so I'm going to start to go through them. Okay, so here's a half statement, kind of a question. It says, perhaps those who utilize ChatGPT or other AI sources can make sure to compose the prompt, which instructs to provide the documented support for conclusions reads, question mark, question mark, question mark. What do you guys think of that particular statement question? I think there's more of them. I think he's just asking a recommendation on perhaps a method or a process for how you would use chat. And I don't know how much you would want to dive into that, Nick, but what are your thoughts on methodology?
Yeah, as far as what prompts are appropriate for what tool, it's just like, asking what formula is correct in Excel. We wouldn't prescribe the specific formula to write in Excel to the appraisal problem. That's up to the appraiser to have the competency to decide that for themselves based on the appropriate scope of work to solve for that appraisal problem. So that would be covered in kind of a standard 1 development issue of your appraisal. And if you were to utilize that tool, obviously having the right competency and following the record keeping rule and appropriately following the conduct section of the ethics rule, we want the appraisers to be aware of, understand, and correctly employ those recognized methods and techniques that are necessary to produce a credible appraisal. That's standard 1.1, for example.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Someone has a suggestion here. Has the ASB reviewed the RICS new Red Book rules? Seems solid to me. Most stuff is already in. AO37 just needs specific comments about AI. So that's just the suggestion. And I don't know if you want to comment or I can move on to the next one.
We'll take that back to the board. I know we've had some board members who have reviewed the Red Book recently, and we will, of course, review anything and everything that is sent in. So I do encourage Justin to, and I think I heard Justin speak, and we continue to reach out to interested parties and try to get them involved. And so I appreciate the feedback here, and I hope that Justin responds to the whole board through the share link.
Okay. If an AI tool doesn't retain output history, how should appraisers comply with USPAP's record keeping requirements? Is a screenshot or export sufficient documentation?
I can jump in a little bit on that one. If it's not retained in the tool, then I think the best option that you have is to document it somehow, which would be the screenshot, or if you can export it. The one thing that I would encourage everybody to make sure is that, as mentioned before about the prompt, I think it's very critical that you include the prompt with the output so that it's very obvious what you asked for and how you asked it, so that that output is linked back to the question that you posed.
Great. Thank you. Okay, here is one. These tools are becoming so powerful that it seems like they're going to be used no matter what, regardless of the risk. It's like moving from a handsaw to an electric table saw. Yes, there is risk with using the tool, but the higher production of the tool is so great, it's worth taking on that risk. Can you give us your opinion of that?
I think the paper does summarize a little bit of the board's position on this so far. Just as we've seen emerging technologies in other areas of appraisal practice, this tool is coming on very quickly and being integrated into appraisal practice really quickly. And that's the key point. We're not just in the business of real property appraisal standards. We have personal property appraisal standards, mass appraisal, review, and business valuation. And we want to hear from all stakeholders on this question, how they're utilizing it, how they're interpreting the leaps that it's making on a day-to-day basis, so that we can be timely and react appropriately and not be on the sidelines. So we want to hear from you and how you're using it specifically and where the applications that you're seeing most relevant. And if the paper doesn't say we are going to issue guidance immediately, We're even asking in the paper whether or not now is the time for guidance. Maybe these leaps might be coming in a year or two and we haven't gotten there yet. So we do encourage all voices and all practitioners out there and users of appraisal services out there to provide their feedback in that manner.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
But
Nick.
one thing I would, based on the comment that's in the chat there, I'm not an expert in AI by any stretch, but I've had a lot of fun and it's been some interesting conversations, as we try to explore what it can do, what it can't do, how to make it work efficiently. And, in a lot of ways, it's no different than, if you were to have an interview with a person to try and find out information that you needed to complete an appraisal. And the way you ask the question can often dictate the way the question is answered. And so AI is really no different. It's just you're having that conversation with the tool rather than a live person. And if you ask the question in a way that leads to a certain answer, that's why I think it's very important to have the prompt with the response, because if you ask it in a leading manner, it may give you the answer that you were looking for. Just like if you were to ask a person and lead them in the questioning, they may give you the answer that you're looking for. It may not be the best answer. It may not be an unbiased answer, but it's this is all evolving as we speak. And like Nick said, we're kind of on the front edge of this, and what we're trying to assess as a board is it timely to issue additional guidance now, or is this evolving so fast that we just be chasing the next development, the next initiative, the next thing? So that's part of what we want to hear as well.
Thank you, Tim. And now, Tim, you've made it clear that you yourself are definitely experimenting with generative AI and learning how to use it. Nick, would you want to add on to that? Because I've got probably 4 questions in here, all related to, is the board using generative AI? What are they learning? What kind of applications are they seeing? Just your own general personal experience, Nick, if you would like.
Yeah, of course. I'm a tech forward person. That those who get to know me a little bit, and I enjoy listening to different people speak on this topic, and I use different tools, and I've poked around in a variety of these, including some of the more prevalent ones like Gemini and ChatGPT, and I've even dabbled along the lines with GPT for All, which is a downloadable local version that you can use on your own personal computer, as well as even some more of the fringe ones that are kind of coming on the market now, like Claude. So we are dabbling. I know most board members I've spoken with have all dabbled with the tools themselves, and we're trying to see and react, see how they have application throughout the process ourselves, for sure.
Thank you. Here's a question. If any restrictions are placed on an appraiser's the way that they use AI, wouldn't that be moving in the wrong direction? Would the most simple answer to be that an appraiser can use any AI, they just need to take full responsibility for the output?
Well, much like the standards say right now, it's up to the appraiser to determine the appropriate scope of work, and that is including methods and techniques. It's not, there's no restriction on using GPT or AI generated content for your appraisal. It's just to follow the proper process of using it currently in the standards. Is it the recognized method and technique that's necessary for that appraisal problem? Are you properly retaining the information for the record keeping rule? And are you complying with the confidentiality section of standards as well? Are you sharing confidential information that the client would otherwise prohibit you from sharing? So those are all questions that we want to make sure that appraisers address in their own practices and make sure that they're compliant with. But the use of the tool, just like, we're not out there to say, you can't use Excel, find something better. We're out there to say it's a tool, and you, appraiser, need to understand the appropriate method and technique and how to solve the problem and whether or not to use that tool.
Tim, do you have anything to add to that?
I agree. I think the key thing the commenter mentioned, and we mentioned earlier as we kind of walked through the paper, is ultimately it's the appraiser's responsibility to determine and to disclose what they've done and how they've done it. and whether to use it or not. And that's really no different between an AI tool or, a mineral report that's prepared by another expert. It's still up to the appraiser to determine whether that's credible and usable and reliable for the intended use of the appraisal. So yeah, again, I think that's the key takeaway here. I think in some ways is that ultimately it's always the appraiser who is responsible for whatever tools they use in completion of their assignment.
Great, thank you. And just FYI, in the question and answer, we have a great conversation going between several different people. And Chandra Mast, I want to thank you, Chandra. She was an expert that this board has turned to in the past and has is an appraiser who's really been on the forefront of all of this. So she doesn't have a question. She's just been answering other people's questions. Thank you. Wanted to say that. One of the things that's coming up as a theme here a lot in the Q&A and in the chat box is basically this concept of, can the foundation or the AQB or the ASB, put together training related to AI? So Nick, I think you'd want to address that role and where y'all would fit in there.
Sure. As far as using AI and using any tool, the foundation and the standards board does not prescribe education on how to use those tools. That has to come from the marketplace itself, the marketplace for education itself. And I know there's been a number of offerings out there, and there'll be continued to be offerings on this topic as it continues to emerge and have practical use within appraisal practice. I think I saw some questions or some statements rather, just kind of how it might relate to residential appraisal software, whether or not you use it on the external programs or not may be one consideration, but you also will likely see the integration of generative AI into the software programs themselves over time, as we start seeing kind of these bots come to play into different sections of the reports themselves to assist. So those education opportunities are going to be fostered by the community and not by the standards board. We provide guidance specific to USPAP and the applicability of USPAP to solve the appraisal problem, and not how to use one specific tool.
Tim, anything?
No, Nick covered that well. I think that's, I don't have anything to add on that one.
Okay. Next question is, so is the ASB itself using AI in its work, for example, in the analysis of comment letters?
At a very high level, we can use AI to help us understand and better facilitate processes, but content itself is generated by the board. So we might use it for some of the, just like in Microsoft Word, where is the line of AI, for example? We're starting to see things like Copilot and other programs that kind of intertwine with Word that help write better sentences or help structure better paragraphs. That can all be offloaded to machine learning if it's applicable for that task. But content itself is generated by the board itself.
And if you don't mind me adding, Nick, so the AQB has had some experience with using AI to look at, in the same way that you're mentioning the comment letters. They did that through having checks and balances, working with a company called the Decision Lab, who puts all of those parameters and guardrails in place so that you don't have hallucinations. You have code written in so it understands exactly what it's doing. It's not going outside generating. So that's over my head in terms of understanding the details of how they did that. But we do know that, because I've used AI as well, and that, like, if you don't understand that hallucination aspect of it, you can create a lot of problems with your data. But so we hired that company to be able to do that control basis.
And I can tell you that the board is encouraged and it's a requirement to read all of the comment letters themselves directly. With that being said, we appreciate, when we get the feedback that we're seeking right now, that if you can try not to use AI to write it itself, because remember, AI always wants to have a positive result out of whatever you put into it. So if you say in AI, how is AI going to retire appraisers? It's going to figure something out to give you that positive result. It thinks that you're seeking an answer to that question, as opposed to maybe more or less trying to structure the question or structure your answer, your comments yourself. And if anything, it's just more or less a grammar and writing process tool more than anything else. If you were to submit comments to the board, please make them your original comments and don't ask AI how it's going to replace us.
Great, Nick. Okay, here's a good question. Are there concerns related to an incompetent or a non-self-aware appraiser determining their own competence related to AI?
Tim, do you want to take a first go at this one?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at it. I mean, I think, again, this is just a tool, and we're all tasked with determining our competency level in any assignment, whether it's for the assignment or the use of any kind of tool. And so, yeah, I think we're all I think we're all responsible for doing that. Anyway, it's just something else that we need to be aware of as appraisers and make sure that we're using it properly. But we're asked to kind of self-certify that competency, or know when we're competent and know when we're not, and have the ethical standards to recognize that and report it to our clients. So it's just another tool in the toolbox, but we're still, as appraisers, responsible for making that determination.
Great, thank you. Here's a great question. Nick mentioned that AI may become directly integrated into reports. Has the ASB thought about that this may blend the line between standard 1 development and standard 2 reporting?
Well, I think the line between 1 and 2 is always kind of being blended, just being that the process occurs in the appraiser's mind. That's standard 1, and standard 2 is reporting. So there is, are we replacing the judgment factor of the appraiser? No. If the development occurs, the judgment and everything that goes in the report still has to be the appraiser. So the onus is always on the appraiser themselves. While these tools might be integrated into software platforms, even on the commercial real property side, we're seeing some of these tools starting to emerge. But like I said, it might be just as simple as a word, spell and grammar check, all the way to Copilot, all the way to Grammarly or any of the other software add-ons that are using intensive editing abilities within Word, or if it's some third-party add-on software separately, the appraiser is still responsible for the output, and the judgment lies with the appraiser, and the responsibility for reporting relies with the appraiser. It's not reliant on the tool. So all those things considered, that's where, for example, in a standard 1 and 2 situation, that's where the appraiser is still front and center according to standards.
So Nick, in a made-up world, which seems very possible now, what if AI, you just went and you talked your way through a house, blah, 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 and you just talked your way through the data you're reading, and it spit out an entire report? So is that blending standards rule 1 and 2, or is nothing really changed there between the appraiser needing to use their judgment at the final outcome of a credible assignment results?
The appraiser still has to use their judgment, right? We have the appraiser in problem identification, scope of work, is required to identify the relevant characteristics in the assignment, not the machine itself. So if you have an input to a machine and the machine outputs something, the appraiser is still responsible for reading that output and determining the appropriate things to include in the report, the relevant characteristics. So that is still onus on the appraiser.
Great. What criteria, if any, would the ASB use to deem when generative AI becomes considered a recognized method?
Well, the standards board doesn't deem any tool or technique or anything else a recognized method. That is up to appraisers and users of appraisal services themselves. So if it is something that your peers are doing and something that clients would expect you to do, that would be in accordance to scope of work acceptability, for example, reviewing that section of USPAP, then that might be something to pursue. We've heard from some clients so far and some users of appraisal services so far, and they are using AI tools themselves. We've heard from appraisers, they are using AI tools themselves. Whether or not it's for your particular assignment, we heard in the intro a podcast on rural appraisal assignments, and maybe they do not use these tools. Maybe they do not use these tools when appraising a Babe Ruth baseball card in personal property appraisal, but maybe they do. And that's up to the appraiser to determine what the recognized methods and techniques are and what those methods are and involve and how to become competent in those. It's not up to the standards themselves to decide that for the appraiser.
Okay, thank you. I have a lot of questions that I'm going to lump into one great big bucket because all of the questions, while they ask different specific tidbits, they all kind of asking the same thing. And I'm wondering, what is the ASB's response to, they're asking questions about, seems like AI does this. What prevents AI from doing that? How does AI do this? Where does USPAP fit in that conversation?
Tim, you want to go on that one?
Yeah, there's one I can see in the Q&A, which is in that lump, Lisa. So it talks about, what's to prevent sensitive information from being uploaded. And I think we touched on that earlier in the paper. You have to understand how your model functions, how the tool functions. I can speak from like the federal government side. When I previously worked there, we were not allowed to use AI tools that would take the information submitted and upload it into the tool itself. They created separate kind of closed door tools that would work with the sensitive information in a closed environment, and it wouldn't be shared outside of the organization. And I know other private companies that have sort of the same situation. So it's not, you have to be careful and again understand how your tool works, because if you put it all into something that's going to share it with everybody, then you may be in not meeting your requirements under the confidentiality section of the ethics rule. So if you know that it's a closed environment and that it's only keeping it locally to where it's protected, then you can use that. I know there was other parts of the question, but that one's one that I saw that I wanted to touch on real quick.
Okay, thank you. Also, there's just a lot of questions kind of along the same, but it's slightly different angle, which is like, what is the ASB's opinion about this particular AI tool, or what is considered AI? So maybe the broader question is really like, when the ASB looks at this concept of AI, what does it consider as being AI when it's talking about it?
Well, from a generative AI standpoint, it's the tools that take data in and output data. It can be in the form of images or text or other video even. And there is no one tool that, as we speak here today, that we're advocating for or against. We're just mentioning tools that exist currently in the market and that we've heard other market participants already discussing. And so the board has interacted with these tools just to see, at least some of the board members have, to see how they interact, how they work within potentially appraisal practice and their potential application. But I can tell you, if you looked at, for example, ChatGPT today and looked at it just a year ago, it's a very different tool than it was. And so we're trying to grasp that and hear from as many market participants as possible to better inform any guidance that we might need to issue related to appraisal practice. Just to promote public trust, we're not trying to promote a tool. We're trying to write the appropriate guidance from a very principles-based level, as opposed to how to apply one specific tool over another.
Okay. And then also maybe, Nick, would you want to talk about, is it standards rule 1-1 about appraiser's responsibility to keep up with changes in,
Oh yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and that is 1-1A. It's to keep abreast with changes and developments in the profession. So I like to use that too with kind of how the board looks at things. You know, we're looking at 1.1a just from a real life perspective of what is what's constantly changing, what's constant, you know, what methods and techniques are being devised, what are the new methods and techniques and new circumstances that appraisers are facing with these tools, and how are they being applied, not just by appraisers, how are clients expecting them to be applied, how do they affect the public trust in appraisal practice when they are used. So we're looking at the full broad picture, not just from the appraiser's perspective, but from the full public trust perspective of the tool themselves.
Okay. This you may not be able to answer. I will just check. Is AI, when you're talking about AI and AVMs, are those the same thing? Or do you consider those slightly different in some way? But if you don't know, it's fine.
No, I have a thought on that. So I think the key with AI and AI tools is that it's the learning component of it that is happening outside or internal to the tool. So it's taking information, it's analyzing, it's sort of changing its brain, if you will. It's making it give a different output based on what it's learning from additional inputs. To me, an AVM is more static. You create a model and you provide data to the model, and it processes the data and it gives you an output, but it's not really learning more. It's just processing the additional data that's performed. It's not learning as it goes and refining the model. Once it starts that piece of learning, that's when I think the AI conversion happens. That's when it changes from an AVM to an AI, if that makes sense.
Okay, that's a great answer. Thank you. I don't know that you guys would be privy to this, but I think it would be information that you would value if it became available, which is lawsuits. Are you aware of any lawsuits that have occurred for appraisers who are using AI and for the improper use of AR? Maybe not even just a lawsuit, but any individual, disciplinary cases related to the use of AI.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a great public comment, that if you are out there and you've heard of cases, we'd love to hear from you and how that's been applied. I have not heard of any specific related to real property. However, similar industries, similar professions, such as the legal profession, there's been a number of instances where attorneys have been reprimanded for the use of AI, inappropriate use of AI in writing legal memorandums to the court. And so certainly those would be pretty significant issues for the attorneys, and there's a lesson to be learned from the attorney's perspective on how it might apply to appraisal practice. So we have read a number of judicial opinion. I have read a few judicial opinions related to attorneys themselves, as well as some of the requirements that have since taken place in the world of law to kind of combat that.
Great. Thank you. A lot of comments here from Keith. Thank you, Keith. I know you're an expert in all these types of topics, and he promised that he will provide us information in his comments. So thank you, Keith. Back to the board. We'll use those. Some more questions, basically, that the ASB wouldn't necessarily be able to answer. I mean, other than personal experience, just how many AI programs are there? What are their dangers, that kind of thing. I don't know if there's anything you would want to address because that is kind of outside of the world of ASB, but if there's a use PAP tie in there, go for it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, how many there are, I couldn't tell you that exact number. That's kind of up to the market, but here's a few that I have in my local models are Reasoner, Llama, Hermes. There's just so many, and there's so many that are emerging, and the ones that are going to emerge and be more dominant in the market, we'll end up finding out, but we don't know that right now because it's such a new and emerging technology. But we're honestly continuing to monitor and continuing to see which ones are the most relevant to appraisal practice and trying to make the best decisions on behalf of public trust in appraisal practice for all practitioners and users of appraisal services.
Okay. This is a good one. Even the most competent and experienced appraisers may never fully understand how complex AI models work. So what is the line between acceptable use and a lack of competency under USPAP, generally speaking?
Tim, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking the best way to tackle that one. I think generally, it's sort of a test of reasonableness and the expectations of the client and your peers. Um, you know, I guess that would be my first answer is like, okay, yeah, we're going to have to figure out what level of competency is required to allow you to rely on the output to deliver credible assignment results based on the intended use. So it's kind of a fuzzy answer, a fuzzy question, but it's one of those that it's kind of one of the challenging areas that we're trying to address is like, okay, what level of understanding do you need to make that or to rely on that output?
I'll just have a comment here from somebody said appraisers use iPhones. They don't know how they work. Even the most advanced researchers don't fully understand all the LLMs and how they work. The transformer technology is the black box even to them.
Yeah.
Here's a new, go ahead, Nick, you have something?
Yeah, and just like, we could break down Argus into a similar question. It's a black box on the back end sometimes to appraisers, but the core principle of how Argus works, how to conduct a DCF, discounted cash flow analysis on the commercial side, you should have the training and knowledge and know how to do that. If you're going to ask for a regression analysis of data in LLM or in one of these programs, you should know what the output means if that's an applicable, if it's applicable to your assignment. It might not be knowing how the tools and inner working of the tool work entirely if it's not relevant to your assignment results, but it might be understanding where the data is going, making sure you're not breaking any confidentiality or ethics violations because of how you're distributing the data. If you're giving it to an open source model that is taking and collecting the data and then redistributing it to everybody else to learn from, we want to make sure that market participants are fully aware of that. But understanding the inner workings of the black box, for instance, that could violate USPAP, we want to make sure that appraisers at least know what the requirements are that they need to follow and have done some type of due diligence to make sure that they're protecting public trust and appraisal practice when using them.
Okay. Do you foresee clients prohibiting appraisers from using AI as an assignment condition? And can they do that? Or where is the appraiser's responsibility there?
So that's a great question, and I think that would be some almost a good Q&A, honestly, because it's almost like a client saying you can't use Excel, you can't use Argus, you can't use a method or technique, and if it's a recognized method or technique that's necessary to solve for credible assignment results, you as the appraiser you're going to have to make the determination whether or not you can accept that assignment condition, particularly where it might affect your assignment results. So you have a client condition coming in, placing an assignment condition on whether or not you can use a specific technology. Can you still produce credible assignment results? Now, appraisers have been doing appraisals without generative AI all the way up until about probably 3 or 4 years ago. Maybe a few people on this call have been longer, so I won't, whenever the initial emergence was. But for today, as of now, where it's kind of becoming more and more prevalent, and where it might be in 5 years, that's going to be up to kind of a scope of work acceptability and whether or not you can produce a credible assignment.
Great answer. Okay, we'll be wrapping up pretty soon here. We just had a zillion questions, and I'm so thankful for those. Somebody's asking a question about when you use AI and how that could possibly not make you more efficient because you have to cross-check any potential mistakes. So where would be the USPAP connection, if any, about a concern about efficiency or having to cross-check mistakes?
I think as we've mentioned a couple of times, the bottom line is that you as the appraiser are responsible for the output. And if you would choose to incorporate that into your appraisal report, it's your responsibility. And so there's some level, I think if you're, this is probably an oversimplification, but if you're working in a market that you're familiar with and you get an output from AI that's different than anything that you've seen in the market, there's going to be some flags there for you. But if it seems like it's in line with what you're seeing from the market, it may not be that you're cross-checking every single thing. It's about you as the appraiser determining whether this is credible for the appraisal or use in the appraisal, and that you can rely on it in providing credible assignment results to your client.
Awesome. Great. Well, I think that I have run through at least the core concepts of everything in the chat and the Q&A. And I just want to say, keep it up. What do you guys think? Can you please send more comments into the ASB as they are requesting from the concept paper? Take a look at that. You can answer the questions that are asked in there, or always just provide any comments you have related to this topic. They're all valued. They're all, like Nick said, they're all read, taken very seriously. So we have until May 31st. Please click on the link in the chat box to submit your comments to the ASB. You can always email them, which is just asb@appraisalfoundation.org. So the board accepts verbal comments at its virtual public meeting. The next one will be September 4th. That will be past the time when this concept paper has closed at 1 p.m. You should see a registration link for that September 4th virtual public meeting, which is the next public meeting. Nick and Tim, do you have any words before we sign off here today?
Well, thanks again, everyone, for hanging in there through this webinar. We're really grateful for your feedback. You can see the work of the board here and what we're trying to do. So we do really hope that you'll submit your comments. And when we say we read every comment, it is true. We're not going to put them in the AI for it to do it for us, like we talked about here. And we're excited to read them. And we're hoping to have you complete those by May 31st there.
Yeah, and I would just kind of echo what Nick said. We're grateful for all the responses that we've gotten so far, and really appreciate your thoughts and input, because we need to hear from you what your concerns are and what your thoughts are. So, and it is true. I can say for a fact that the board reads all the comments. So let us hear your thoughts and send us in whatever you have, because every comment is read by every board member, and we do take them very seriously, and we appreciate very much your responses.
And thank you all for taking time out of your incredibly busy days out there, and for just being so active and involved in this conversation today. Very valuable. And one last thing, when you sign out today, there's going to be a quick 1-minute survey. Just says what'd you like, what did you like, what should we change? Please fill that out. We do use that to help inform how we run our webinars as well. So thank you again. Reach out at any time. We are here to help you. Thank you for being with us, and hope to hear from you from your comment letters. Have a great day.